All right, welcome back. We're going to finish up on chapter 4, and we're going to look at the fungi. We're going to look at the anatomy, how these kind of flesh out the terms of heterotrophs, saprobes, and parasites. Explain the relationship between fungal hyphae and the production of mycelium, and then we'll talk about the way fungal spores arise, and I'll kind of go with that. But one way to look at fungi is sort of a hybrid eukaryote plant microbe type a situation, I guess you could say. The fungal cells are sort of like the tortoise and the hare. The fungus would be more like a tortoise. It isn't built for speed, but it's built for the long term, and it can handle pretty rough environments if need be. Fungal cells do not have chloroplasts as plants do. They're heterotrophic, where of course plants are autotrophic, getting it from the sun. So the fungal cells have to acquire their energy from its environment. Fungal cells have rigid cell walls made from chitin. It's one of the reasons why they're so tough and cellulose. So that's a huge difference. Mycolic acids are long fatty acids found in the cell walls of the Mycolata toxon, which is a group of bacteria that includes the Mycobacterium tuberculosis, and they form a major component of the cell wall. Despite their name, mycolic acids have no biological link to the fungi, even though you think mycology or myco might refer to fungi. It's not. It's one of the common misconceptions in a clinical lab. Fungal cells include yeasts, which are round to oval shape, which can throw a microbiologist a new one perhaps, but they bud. They're not regular. They're very smooth. The sizes are sort of like a flip of the coin. Those are the things. Bacteria tend to be clones. They're identical, where the yeast cells are not. So the hyphae are long thread-like cells found in the bodies of filamentous fungi. The hyphae are very characteristic. Pseudohyphae are chains of the yeast. They don't really have any like stalks. They're just chains, and so some fungal cells are considered two-shaped or dimorphic and can take on either form depending on growth conditions. So that really should be underlined, highlighted right there. That depends on growth conditions. The fungi, of course, have to. Plants can be a little bit consistent because, hey, you know, they can photosynthesize, so they're autotrophic. Fungal cells have to acquire their energy from the surrounding environment, and that can vary. So fungal cells have cell walls that contain chitin, whereas cell walls of plants contain cellulose. And of course we know that because you just think of the cow chewing its cud. The bacteria that are in that cud are going to break down the cellulose. Or fungal cells just, if you've ever tried to get rid of a fungal infection or have fungi in showers and things like that, you know how hard it is to get rid of it. And so the chitin or fingernail type material, that's pretty tough. Genetic studies have shown the fungi are more closely related to animals than to plants. I mean, that's an understatement, but anyhow, here's sort of the breakdown, looking at the fungal setup. Is that you have the phospholipid bilayer, the chitin layer, and then you get these interlinked glucans, 1 to 3 and 1 to 6. They're both beta. So beta bonds are really hard to break down, and so certain bacteria can do it, but we can't. And then you've got mannose, which are mannoproteins up here, so proteins with sugars attached. So that's kind of what we're dealing with. And then of course we have chitin synthase and glucan synthase. These are enzymes that literally make these materials. And so the weaponry for fungi is really more into the defense of shields up. It's they can build a pretty a long-term shield, and that's why I like the tortoise and the hare analogy. If you think of a tortoise as that hard shell that the life form lives within, that's sort of what we got here. This green hump in the back of the fungi is really very much like a tortoise. It's slow, but it's going to grow. Hyphae of molds are very characteristic of the fungi. Is this septate type of hyphae where you see they break. Now there's a lot of theories as to why that is, but they think it's to, of course, shed it and spread it, and that's one of the things. But in penicillium molds, that's one of the ways you kind of determine. If you have this white moldish with a big dark circle in the middle, most likely a penicillium mold, which they use to make penicillin. Rhizopius is another one, but it has no hyphae. So as a microbiologist, you look for these sorts of things to determine. Yeast, as we look at, quite interesting. They're blebs. That's the way I like to look at it. They could be all sorts of different shapes, and sometimes they have blebs with blebs, and those are my terms. They're buds, these little yellowish type things, and they form these sort of chains. They like to refer to them as pseudohyphae. They kind of, if you look at it, could be the segments, but it's not. It's just the cellular types of the yeast that form these pseudohyphae. Very unique under a microscope, and it's pretty much pins down that type. 300 species of fungi can cause human disease. I mean, that is nothing to sneeze at. Three types of fungal diseases. We have the community acquired by environmental, hospital associated infections by the pathogens, and then the opportunistic caused by low virulent species infecting weakened individuals, usually the immune system. Harmless spores can cause opportunistic infections in AIDS patients. Of course, the immune system is somewhat hampered in AIDS patients. So there you go. Fungal cell walls give off substances that cause allergies, severe ones. It depends. There are a lot of molds and things that you can have around your home that can be a constant allergen. Some produce toxins that can be really dangerous in a home and environment. And Aspergillus flavus produces a potentially lethal poison in animals that eat contaminated grain. And so a lot of these are just waste products. We call them toxins because of the effects, but they're just getting rid of some of their waste. Number of species are pathogenic to corn. So if you have a patient that comes in that's corn, hello, Mr. Corn. No, it's just to be aware of the agricultural impact. If you've ever been to a grain or a huge facility that sells grain and things, the smell is enough to really waken you up, and a lot of that is due to the molds and fungi. Fungi rot destroys a lot of the fresh produce, and it's not good for business to be trying to sell an orange that's got a big old mold ring on it. People won't buy it, so end up throwing about 40% of it away. So they try to look at ways to try to prevent that. And chilling it's one of the ways. It slows it down. So the fungi's benefits, of course, is decomposition of matter. It does take a while, but they will eventually uh, break it down. Plant roots, there's a huge amount of ecology going on as we walk around on grass and various things, and the roots, uh, really, its ability to absorb water and nutrients and the like, is sort of a relationship with the fungi. We can engineer, and we have engineered with biotechnology the fungi for antibiotics and types of alcohols, organic acids, and vitamins. And we also do it use the fungi for flavoring foods and thickeners and that sort of thing. Okay, fungal nutrition. And so these are some of the terms I think it's important if you learn these. And again, do it systematically where we look at heterotroph. Anytime you look at a troph is something, it's a requirement or need. And so it's different needs. So it acquires nutrients from a wide variety of organic substrates. So heterotrophic. Saprobic obtains nutrient from remnants of dead plants and animals. And parasitic, grow in the bodies of living animals or plants, although few require a living host. So heterotrophic, saprobic, and parasitic are terms that are important. They're pretty straightforward, but just think of it as a parasite is a lose-lose, or it's a lose-win, I guess, for the organisms growing on there. So fungi penetrate the substrate and secrete enzymes that reduce it to small molecules that can be absorbed. So it's sort of like spiders in some ways, that they put the enzymes and meat tenderizers and things like that. Sort of does the digestive on the outside and then brings it in. And the fungi thrive in nutritionally poor adverse environments, especially those with high salt or sugar content. So the fungi are pretty creative. The cells with the most microscopic fungi growth in loose association of colonies. Colonies of yeast, they do look like bacteria. They're soft, uniform, and you saw some of the graphics that I've already shown. This kind of reviews some of the things that I've already talked about. But you see, redundancy, if you recall in memory, is an important tool that I use to get you to keep this information. Colonies of filamentous fungi have a cottony, hairy, or velvety texture. And anytime you've left bread out, welcome to the world of fungi. Mycelium, the woven intertwining mass of hyphae. The septa, I've already shown you, are segments or cross walls found in most of these. Non-septate hyphae consists of one long continuous cell. Vegetative hyphae are responsible for visible mass of growth, as it appears on bread and that sort of thing. Reproductive fertile hyphae produce spores, and that's one way it gets disseminated. They propagate the outward growth. The spores, of course, are the reproductive mode of the fungi, can be dispersed by the movement of air, water, and living things that bump into it. And I'll show you some pictures of that. They germinate upon favorable incubation, and so you can see the sporangio, which is just a sac of spores, is essentially what it means. And there's your sporangium that contains them. Some of them look like dandelions and that sort of thing. And then you can see the segmented hyphae, and you see how they break off, and a lot of ways that's how they disseminate it. The large conidia or macroconidia, you can see they're rather larger, and the porous spores. So a lot of the reproductive and ways of disseminating so it can make more of itself are done on asexual spore formation. Sporangiospores formed by successive cleavages with that sac-like head called sporangium, which I just had shown the pictures. Conidiospores or conidia are free spores not enclosed by the spore-bearing sac. Kind of just terminology there. Linking of genes from two parent fungi creates offspring with a combination of genes different from that of the parents. Variations lead to it's the way it can adapt to the environment and create. Sexual spores vary from simple fusion of fertile hyphae to complex union of male female, and boy, I can tell you that some of those cycles are pretty complicated. All right, now we're going to move into uh, protozoans, and uh, this segment, I'll just stop for a second and graphically, these protozoa sort of give away what they are. This is where microbiology really comes into play. There are caricatures of these things that help you remember them. But that's how you do it. This is just slightly different, is how they look and how to identify them. And then you remember the types of diseases that they can produce. So, Amoeba histolyticus, Trypanosome gambinis, Leishmania dovani, Leishmania tropica, Trichomonas vaginalis, Giardia lambia, Plasmodium vivax, Toxoplasma gondii, and Balantidium coli. These are all different types of protozoa, and they have rather intricate stages, cyst stages, and the like. But this is how I'm going to show you how I remember these, and they're sort of like little caricatures. But these could be like a Giardia intestinalis, sort of looks like something that you take to a Mardi Gras, or the Trypanosome gambinis. But you see they have somewhat of a unique, the two eyes and one eye. Trichomonas has sort of like a worm-like look, where Leishmania has sort of a strange, I don't know, a single cell type of look, but they're all human parasites. And so the Trypanosome protozoa, it causes sleeping sickness, causes Chagas disease, parasites spread by insects, vectoring by insects. We have insect commonly called the kissing bug, which does anything but kiss. But the bite from this bug could be the kiss of death. But the Trypanosome protozoa is spread that way. Giardia protozoa, it causes giardiasis. The parasites enter the body through food or water, so you ingest this. This is the Mardi Gras goer. The protozoa attach to the lining of the host's small intestine, where they prevent the host from fully absorbing nutrients. They can also cause diarrhea, abdominal pain, and fever. So this acquired by food will cause intestinal types of problems. Plasmodium vivax, or tropozoite, is the pretty common form. If you look, you can see these in blood smears spread by the mosquito vector, and they can cause fever, joint pain, anemia, and fatigue. Malaria is a common tropical and subtropical climate type of disease. It's one of the most common infectious diseases on the planet, and malaria is a very serious disease because it kills millions of people, and they're still looking into trying to find ways to control it. And one of the ways is putting nets up around where you sleep, so you don't get the mosquitoes. And Plasmodium falciparum is a unicellular protozoa parasite of humans, the deadliest species of Plasmodium that causes malaria. It's transmitted through the Anopheles mosquito. About 50% of all the malaria cases is from this, and it's regarded as the deadliest parasite. And so 500,000 deaths is a lot. I mean, one death is a lot, but wow, it's pretty bad. The protozoa comes from first animals, like a prototype. proto, and then zoa, like zoo. So it's the first or early animal, and that's where that word comes from. It's Greek. Uh, 12,000 species of single cell creatures. Most are harmless, free living inhabitants of soil and water. And of course, a million, hundreds of millions of infections. Single cells containing the majority of eukaryotic organelles except chloroplast. Cytoplasm is divided into ectoplasm. Now, it's not being something from Ghostbusters. The ectoplasm is a clear outer layer involved in locomotion, feeding, and protection. The endoplasm is the inner region housing all the goodies and things that it needs to do what it does. Organelles act as a primitive nervous system to coordinate movement, and it moves by using pseudopods or false feet. A cell membrane regulates food waste and secretions. Most of the protozoans are about 3 to 300 micrometers. They can some of the giant amoebas can be pretty large, but you can see food particles, flagellum, nucleus, pellicle, endoplasmic reticulum, mitochondria. You can see pretty much these protozoas. The oral groove, it pulses these hairs, it moves in for feeding and digestive on the inside. Heterotrophic, require food in complex organic form. Free living, it can scavenge dead plants or animal debris. It graze on bacteria and algae. They have those oral grooves that have the hairs that sort of pump. And they absorb food directly through the cell membrane. Pathogenic species may live on the fluids of their host, or feed on, or actively feed on tissues. Main limiting factor is availability of moisture. They do desiccate. Predominant habitats are fresh and marine water, which we start to see that a lot, especially when we have flooding and things like that, and can survive in extremes of temperature and pH. They can handle it. Now, whenever you're asked a question and you haven't a clue, and they're asking what life cycle stage is this showing and whatever, 9 times out of 10, if you answer tropozoite, you'll be right, because that's kind of the standard, most predominant stage. And believe me, the life cycle of some of these are really, really tough, and I just take it from a tip from your Uncle Ed. Tropozoite answer usually works. Cysts are dormant resting stage, sort of like spores, if you want to think of it that way. And it's a way for them to kind of hunker down and to spread. So the tropozoite is the modal feeding life stage. It's where predominantly it spends its time. So there's the tropozoite. We can start to form a cyst. So it's either in the tropozoite or it's in some stage of forming a cyst. And it can reemerge from a cyst in form of tropozoite, but this is the predominant stage at which these things live. Balantidium coli, a transmission of balantidiasis, which acquires through the ingestion of contaminated food or water. They reside in the lumen of the large intestines where they replicate, and then the tropozoites keep going unless there's a problem, and they will form cysts, because once it gets into the gut, then it's going to spread them by using that spread them in the feces. So sort of it goes into the food, so it constantly causes some sort of intestinal discomfort and all sorts of things, and then it spreads it by forming these cysts, and then out they go. And then usually from bad bathroom practice and that sort of thing. Protozoan groups exist only in the tropozoite phase. That's why I say always kind of respond with that. If you're not sure if they're asking for what stage, just say tropozoite. Trichomonas vaginalis is the most common STD. It doesn't form cysts, and must be transmitted by intimate contact. These desiccate, so saying that you get Trichomonas vaginalis from a toilet seat lid, no, no. Anamoeba histolytica and Gardiolambia form cysts and are readily transmitted in contaminated water. And that's roughly what I want you to remember is the Trichomonas is STD, or the sexually transmitted disease. Anamoeba histolytica and Gardiolambia form food-related parasites, and that's a good one to do. I have a chart here for you to look at. All protozoa reproduce by simple asexual mitotic cell division, multiple fission. Sexual reproduction also occurs in most protozoa, so they have more complex forms, and I'm not even going to go into that. It's way beyond the scope of what we need to worry about. But these are the types of things, sort of this summary that's important, and if you could review these. Anamoeba histolyticas, water, food. Naegleria, Antamoeba, anything with a amoeba, that's moved. Acanthe is a free living, but acanthe is sort of a yellow amoeba. Free living, it does have a color. It's a brain infection. Balantidium coli causes balantidiosis. It's an intestinal. The symptoms, usually we get it from cattle or pigs and that sort of thing. Gardiolambia, intestinal distress, gardiasis, food and water. Trichomonas is STD. Trypanosome brucei. Trypanosomes are intestinal. Again, it's vector-borne, but it's widespread. Trypanosomes. Leishmania dovani. And there's several other leishmaniasis is skin lesions are spread by involvement of internal organs. They're usually vectored. Usually you have diagnosis through some sort of histology when you're looking at infected organs. Plasmodium vivax and malaria. Toxoplasma gondii, flu-like illness, a silent infection. Again, you can get this from handling toxoplasmosis kitty litters and things like that, believe it or not. Cryptosporidium, intestinal and other symptoms of water and food. It can be really nasty. Cyclospora, it causes intestinal. So most of these are intestinal type things transmitted by food, and you can see pictures of some of these down here at the bottom. So active feeding and mobile stage of the protozoa life cycle is what stage? And boy, these look really complicated, but tropozoite, gee, that excellent idea. Why don't we say tropozoite? And you would be right. Two major groups of helminths, or worms, body types, and a typical type. The biggest ones are tapeworms, flukes, and roundworms. You can imagine on the veterinary side, this is huge, and it is, and I'm not going to bore you with going into all sorts of details about that. I just want you to know that the helminths is type that are tapeworms, flukes, and roundworms, and if you can remember that, that'd be great. Most of them are gastrointestinal type of issues. We have the flatworms, or Platyhelminthes. Platy means flat worms, very thin, segmented bodies. Now, one of the things I'll tell you is that these worms, or these types of pathogens that we're talking about, the helminths, they are lean, mean, reproductive machines. That's really what these are. And the segments are really just designed for reproduction over and over and over again. You tear it, it can reproduce. You try to break it apart, it can reproduce. You get my point. And then at the very end, they have a scolex, which has the little proglottids or these things. Normally, they're pictured with little hairs or fangs that stick out, or teeth, or protrusions of some kind, and they hang in. Now, believe it or not, they used to give this types of worms, the tapeworms, as a way to lose weight, because these are reproductive machines, and in order to support making all these proglottids here, each of these are proglottid, the little sexual machine. It takes a lot of energy, so they eat a lot of food. That would not be recommended to lose weight that way. There's the nastiness up here. Once you get this part, usually has a few proglottids. It's really hard to get rid of it. Usually low levels of cyanide or some toxic where it makes you feel really, really sick, but it gets rid of these things. It kills them. But I've seen tails, that's a joke. People take these tapeworms and these little rubberized type pills, and then they start to grow, and you do lose weight. The problem is the tail part, it grows so long and all the way through your intestinal part and come back right out your throat, and you can see the tail wagging and wave to you when you go to look, and it's not good. I would not recommend that. Here's elephantiasis caused by problem is that when they get into your vascular system, the valves in your veins, normally we have muscular action that moves the venous blood, and then once it's pumped to a certain area, it falls down due to gravity. We have these little valves that holds it in place until you have muscle contraction that moves it on. Problem is these worms kind of hold the valves open, leaves the door open, and it can't close, so it leaks, and so you can never sufficiently move your blood, and this is what happens. You get this sort of back drainage due to gravity, and we call it elephantiasis, and it is really nasty. It's hard to deal with it. It's very appealing at a beach. You can imagine, going in your Speedo and that. Well, anyhow, that's a bad joke. It's bad. And you can see the worms kind of under your skin or in your eye, places in the intestinal tract, and it does get around. So the roundworms are pathogenic because they grow, and there's heartworms and dogs and cats and various creatures that go around, and these things are just reproductive little machines, and they will do that and until the cows come home, really. Multicellular animals are equipped with organs and organ systems. Most of them are reproductive organs. Pathogenic helminths, the most developed organ is the reproductive tract. Therefore, it is a reduction in the digestive, excretory, nervous, and muscular. So it doesn't care too much about those because its job one is to reproduce and to get more of them out there so they can reproduce. And then when they reproduce more, then they spread more and they can reproduce. You get the point. Life cycles in reproduction. Complete life cycles include fertilized egg, larva, adult stages, reproduce sexually in the host body. Nematodes' sexes are separate and different in appearance. Trematodes or trematodes are sexes that can be separated by, they have both hermaphroditic, and cestodes are generally hermaphroditic, and so that's kind of how we break them and separate those based on reproduction. So a nematode, a trematode, and a cestode are, the trematodes can be hermaphroditic where cestodes are. The helminth's life cycle, I'm not going to have you worry about that. There's enough that I'm going to have you worry about, and so I don't want you spending too much time. Just know roundworms, nematodes, flatworms, trematodes, and cestodes, and the differences between these two are the cestodes are hermaphroditic, but there are some things to associate with the classes of nematodes. Let's say roundworms, trichinella. This is the trichinella worm. This is the Bible made reference to trichinosis, not eating pork, and this is why it's this particular organism. It gets in there and it makes these cysts. Um, Tissue nematodes. These I'm not going to have you know these by names really. Just looking at types of diseases. The pinworm, trichinella worm, things like that, and they require certain hosts, and they burrow, and then they cause the disease. And a lot of it's because things aren't thoroughly cooked. And there you go. But as far as memorizing, it's just knowing that the roundworms are about really nematodes, flatworms, or trema, or cestodes, and this can be a hermaphrodite, and these usually are. So that's kind of about it. Um, when you have a lean, mean, sexual reproducing machine, they're going to lay eggs, and that's usually how these things can spread. And of course, that's what we worry about, and we got to wash hands and things like that. There are some pinworm or seat worms, and children can get pinworms. Sometimes you see them come out at night around the anus and that sort of thing, and you can they wave to you. It's really nice. Common infestations of the large intestine, and they're large enough so you can see them. And a life cycle, microscopic eggs are swallowed, picked up from another. So a lot of times you see children scratching their bottoms or under their diapers and that sort of thing, and then they put it in their mouth, and it just kind of goes through the passage, and you'll start to see it go through the gastrointestinal system, and they'll have little pinworms, and you treat that with some drugs, and you're pretty much it. Distribution and importance of parasitic worms. About 50% of the species of helminths are cause disease in humans. Distributed throughout all parts of the world. Conservative estimate about 50 million helminths infections in North America. So it's a pretty large. Chances are you're going to see these. So adulthood and mating of helminths occur in the what stage? Mating of the helminths occurs in the intermediate host or the definitive host, because all the others aren't really. Mating of helminths occurs in the definitive host. So the definitive host becomes the carrier, and they mate and spread and disseminate. So D would be the right answer. And we are done with chapter 4. And I tried to highlight things to kind of focus on. And then we'll be moving on to chapter 5 for next week. But I'll have the pre-test for both 3 and 4 up soon. And this slide set and all that's already been posted. So we're getting there. We're moving right along. And I appreciate your patience and things as I fight access to the internet and things. One of the troubles of doing online at home, I guess. Do the best we can is all we can do. Appreciate your time. And I'll see you on the upside of chapter 5.